So here's our first type of question we're going to be learning about. It's called find a code. So in these questions, you'll be given a certain number of shapes, usually 3 or 4 or 5, that have 2-letter codes, maybe sometimes 3-letter codes under them. And you need to figure out what the first letter in the code means, what the second letter in the code means, and then you're given a new code and you have to figure out which shape matches that new code. So what we can figure out here is, for example, we can see that this code CD and this code CZ have the same first letter. So they have to have something that they have in common that would represent this letter C. What we can tell is that they're both circles, and coincidence, or maybe not, C is the first letter in circle. So that's a pretty good bet for what the letter C stands for. You can't always use this in the 11 plus or in other exams. The code won't always match what it means, like it won't be the first letter of circle, for example, every time, but sometimes it can be helpful to detect those things. So what else can we find? Now that we know that C stands for circle, we can maybe guess that T stands for triangle and S stands for square. That would make a lot of sense, right? Since that matches the images. So we're looking for a code that starts with T, so we're looking for a triangle. So we can already maybe tell what the correct answer is, but let's look at the second half of the code. The second half of the code for the image we're looking for is Z, which is the same as this image. And what do we have here? A circle with zigzags in it. And then you might notice that the triangle with lines has an L and the circle with dots has a D. So we can pretty much bet that this code at the end over here, TZ, is going to be a triangle with zigzags, and therefore it's going to be that third image there with the little check mark. Okay, so here are the top tips for solving find a code questions. You need to look for codes with the same letters that are in the same position. So it needs to be the first letter both times, or the second letter both times, or both, or all 3 times, but it needs to be in the same position in the code. It can't just be the same letter. And then focus on the images that have the same letter in the same position and see if they have any shared feature. Like we saw that there was a C and a C, and we noticed that both of those were circles. And then you can use those shared features to deduce a rule for that position and or for that letter, and you can move on from there. Okay. Oh, here is the 2 fantastic mnemonics that you should use over and over and over again whenever you're solving NVR questions. I'm sure they came up in Wing's lesson yesterday as well, but this is the first one. Never say stop to a cute panda, which stands for number, size, shape, total, angle, color, pattern. So those are the 7 things that you should maybe look out for when you're trying to find what could possibly match between these 2 shapes. Could it be the number of shapes? Could it be the size of the shape? Could it be the shape of the shape? Could it be the total number of things? Could it be the way that the angles are? Is it an obtuse angle or an acute angle? How about the colors? Are the colors the same? Are they different? How about the inner pattern? Remember how we had dots and zigzags and lines in that first question? Those are different types of patterns. Okay, that's our first mnemonic. Never say stop to a cute panda. Our second mnemonic is MOPS. These are MOPS. That's a good way to remember movement, orientation, placement, and symmetry. These are also things that you can look out for whenever you are trying to solve an NVR question. We'll get to MOPS in a bit more detail later in the lesson, but just so you already have that in your brain, that's a great one as well. Okay. Here is another find a code example. In this example, we have a bunch of different crosses. Now let's do the same thing we did last time. Can we see any codes that have the same letter in the same position? We've got P and P in that first and that third cross. What do they have in common? Maybe the size / shape of the cross, how thick the cross is. They're the same across those 2 images and different in the one that has a Q, so that's a really good bet. We need to find the code for this cross at the end over here, and that one's thinner than the 2 that have the P as the first letter for the code, but it is the same width as this one, so maybe it needs to have a Q in the first letter. It definitely doesn't have a P in the first letter, so we can eliminate that answer option, right? Now, what else is different about these crosses that could be represented by the second letter in the code? We've got one cross all the way on the left with like a thin outline here. This one has a really thick outline, and then this one has a dotted outline. And they have 3 different letters, J, K, and L. So maybe those letters represent the type of outline. So if that were true, then we would want the second letter for this shape to be the same as the second letter for this shape. So we would want it to be an L. And that's one of the answer options. So that's a pretty good bet. I think we have solved it. Oh, here it is, step by step. I forgot that would happen in the next slide. But yes, it says the same thing that I just did. We can see that P stands for, will stand for size, and the P represents thick crosses. And so we can eliminate P, and then we also know that we want L to stand for a dotted line or a dashed line outline. And so that is what we find at the end. The perfect code for this one is QL. Tell me, which one do you think is the right code for this final symbol here at the end? Okay, we can start solving it together. So what is different about these 5 images on the screen here? We can use the MOPS mnemonic. Is there any movement? Not really. Is there different orientations? Yes. We've got an arrow pointing up, an arrow pointing left. Here's one pointing down, here's one pointing right. The arrows can be in all 4 of those different positions. And then we've got this answer arrow, the one that we're looking for, the code for, is pointing down again. So this is definitely going to have one letter in common with this one, right? But we're not necessarily sure which yet. What else is different between all these images? The pattern in the background, right? Here we've got lines that are, you could say, vertical. Here we've got lines that are horizontal, and here we've got lines that are diagonal. I wonder if the letters that we have in all the codes maybe match any of those things. It looks like pretty much everyone agrees that the answer is B, and I agree, because what you will notice, as I started to explain, is that V stands for vertical lines in the background, H stands for horizontal lines in the background, and D stands for diagonal lines in the background. And here we've got horizontal lines in the background, so we'll want an H as that first letter. And then the second letter is like geography, right? North, west, south, east. It's the direction of the arrow. Our arrow is pointing down, or in other words, it's pointing south. So our code is going to be HS, as you all figured out. Absolutely amazing work. Really good job. Okay. Here is the breakdown and the answer. We figured it out just like that check mark is telling us. HS was the correct answer.